Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today for our article series here with Will Warren of the Economic Recovery Corps. We'll be discussing economic development and workforce initiatives to help drive change to rural America. This is presented by Shaping Our Appalachian Region, and SOAR is a nonprofit dedicated to transforming lives and communities across Eastern Kentucky through meaningful employment and economic self-sufficiency. So, Will, we're happy to have you here with us. Maybe give everybody a little bit about your story and your background.
Yeah, happy to be here. That was a mouthful there that you had for SOAR. Um, but I know SOAR obviously is doing great things. My background, I've been working in economic and community development for a couple of decades now. I guess that kind of shows my age, but um, I, I have worked all over the country in some form or fashion in the economic development space, for larger municipalities, smaller municipalities, larger regions, smaller regions, urban, rural. Over the last year, I actually applied for this fellowship that I saw, and one of the things that attracted me to it, they defined it as kind of a new way of looking at economic development. And so I applied to be a fellow, and they chose, I think out of 1,400 applications, they chose 65 fellows to go to 65 underserved areas throughout the country. And I just happened to be one of those fellows. And during the application process, we had to also apply to different host organizations. I didn't know SOAR was a host. They didn't know I was a fellow. I just happened to match with SOAR. And, I was, as you know, Trevor, I was born and raised in Eastern Kentucky. Opportunity took me away for a bit, but this opportunity gave me the chance to come back home, a place that I've always come home, and do the work that I've really been doing over the last couple decades, in a place that I'm really passionate about and want to see be as prosperous as possible. And so, all this time that I've been working outside the region, in economic development, I've always had in the back of my mind, how can what I'm doing actually work also in rural Eastern Kentucky? And I think this is just a perfect opportunity for me to be able to do that. When I first started at SOAR as a fellow, um, we were in the process of writing the Economic Recovery Corps, not the Economic Recovery Corps, but we were in the process of writing the recompete grant for EDA. And so I dove kind of headfirst into that, helping to write the grant. Fast forward, we were actually awarded the grant. We were one, it was at the time one of the most competitive grant processes that EDA has ever had. I think almost 700 applications. They chose 22 finalists. We were one of the finalists. Then they chose six winners, and we were the top winner in regards to awards. We got $40 million from EDA as well as a $10 million match. So $50 million to run what we refer to now as the EKY, or the Eastern Kentucky Runway Program. And I kind of dove headfirst again into that, helping to implement that, helping SOAR, kind of in an advisory role to build the program to where it is today. And yeah, that's a little bit about my background, maybe more than you wanted to hear.
Well, I know we are all excited to have you a part of what's happening here at SOAR, and it's always great to have another Kentucky boy back with the rest of us.
Yeah, that's right.
Looking at today's article as we kick off the series, the title for the article is The Great Reattachment. And so, uniting workforce and economic development to revitalize rural America. I know that can sound intimidating, right? When you read, maybe you pick up an article like that. But really, there's two key stats that you had towards the beginning of the article there. I'd love to maybe have you unpack those a little bit, but the one was on population flight. It mentions that there's more than half of the U.S. Rural counties lost residents between 2010 and 2020. And so that would be, prime working age adults, 25 to 54. They're leaving at the highest rates. Obviously, that is, drains local tax bases. It shrinks the consumer markets. And then also, you mentioned the labor force disengagement, which this would play into the prime age kind of labor force here. and specifically what that looks like in more rural counties. Maybe you can dive into that a little bit. What is really this? Um, you mentioned the high cost of the split system. We're talking about, population flight, labor force disengagement, economic development. How do all these things go together?
Well, I'll step back a little bit and talk about the recompete program and kind of the purpose of the recompete program. It was really focused on, and you mentioned it, the prime age worker, but it's really around the prime age employment gap. And when you're talking about the prime age employment gap, rather than focus on unemployment, if you look at unemployment nationally, it's around 4% right now, so it's relatively low, most regions appear to be in good shape if you look at just unemployment. But EDA took it a little step further to look at the prime age employment gap. And so that considers people that, like you said, are disengaged, but that have completely fallen out of the workforce. And they don't count in that unemployment standard or that unemployment count. They only count towards this prime age employment gap. So those are individuals, like you said, between 25 and 54 that have just completely fallen out of the workforce. They're no longer considered unemployed because they are disengaged and they've stopped looking for work. And so, in the 12 counties that we focus on through the Recompete grant, you only needed a 5% gap in order to apply for the grant. By what I mean by 5% gap, the national average for labor force participation is around 80%. And so your region needed to be 75% of the labor force actually in the labor force. So there's that 5% gap between 80 and 75. In the 12 counties that we focus on, there's a 30% gap. And so that means only about half the actual working force population is actually in the labor force in those 12 counties. It fluctuates to around, 50 to 55% of the actual labor force, leaving that 30% gap. So when we looked at this application, we almost looked at it as, they're writing this for us because this is a huge issue in Eastern Kentucky, especially in those coal impacted counties that we're focused on. And in the article, when I talked about the high cost of a split system, like I said, I've been working in economic development for a long time now, and I've seen not only the disengagement of workers, but the disengagement between economic development and workforce development. It's almost like they work in two separate silos and they're not communicating, they're not working together a lot of times, and that leads a big burden to the community at large. I'll give you just one example. Most, even rural places, have heard of or have an industrial park.
Mhm.
Most people know what an industrial park is, but a lot of times you see in rural areas that industrial park is almost non-active or completely abandoned. And then right next door, there's a workforce training center that are training people for jobs that aren't necessarily tied to local demand. So you have these trainees being trained with nowhere to work, and then this industrial park that's totally disconnected and a lot of times abandoned. And this workforce and economic development are not working together to get people that end result, which is what the whole point of our program is, to get people back to meaningful employment or meaningful work. And so I've seen this throughout my career, this disengagement between economic development and workforce development, when in reality, they should be braided. They should be working together as one. The only person when you see this digit, the only thing that pays the price when you see this misalignment is the community. And so, in order to make the community as prosperous as possible, in order to benefit the individuals that are looking for work, in order to benefit the employers that are looking for employees, is to re-engage this split system to make them work as one. That's kind of the point of the article.
Absolutely. And I like it later on in the article, I'm sure you'll maybe mention this as we talk, but it's a like a population stabilizing strategy as well. It's not kind of just one thing here, and then this is another aspect. But like when they work together, we're also combating some of the population loss for some of these counties that have been experiencing this since several years now. And so maybe speak a little bit. What is reuniting that system? What does that look like, and how has the EKY Runway program kind of been able to structure itself to do that?
Yeah, I think the runway program itself is intentionally kind of blurring those lines. We treat human capital as really core economic infrastructure. And I think I talk about that in the article. I talk about empowerment coaching, credentialing, employer engagement. These aren't really separate tracks. They're braided together, really from day one. That means that talent is developed in step with the overall economic strategy, and uh, it's not really just an after the fact. Like they all are working as one in unison, kind of how I answered that first question. Like they're truly through the EKY Runway program braided together as we're working with clients or individuals that are looking for that meaningful employment. We're also working directly with employers to connect those individuals on a daily basis.
And maybe speak a little bit to the coaching infrastructure there. I know it's a term maybe people have been somewhat familiar with, but how's the runway program been able to differentiate itself a little bit with that approach?
Yeah, so we look at, I talk about it in the article, but we have empowerment coaches as part of our program. We also have peer support specialists, and we learned through research when we were applying for the grant that that support system is really one of the key drivers for economic mobility for a person, but also for a region. And so we look at empowerment coaching really bottom line, kind of what it builds is trust and persistence. It keeps people engaged when challenges arise. But really, to scale it, I think you have to think of coaching, and I mentioned this before, but you really have to think of coaching like you're funding roads or like you're funding broadband, like part of economic development as this long-term connector between people and opportunity. It's just as important as those physical infrastructure components that you see in economic development. Coaching can take someone just as far in their career. That support can drive economic mobility just like broadband can for a region. And so I think that what we do with the EKY Runway program is look at coaching and look at that support system as that. And we provide that accountability, but also that support for the individual, not just short term or just um, to that initial job, but you mentioned stability. So it's to stability, but also through career development for that person, providing that 100% human-centered support system throughout their career.
I love one aspect of the how the coaching kind of connects then into that next phase with kind of helping people find those career opportunities of the credentialing aligned with what actually employers are looking for, and then maybe speak a little bit to the SOAR, EKY Talent Network, and how the team is able to connect with those employers that are looking for talent right now.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned in the article some design principles, and it's kind of around that idea of the talent network that we had. It's really like you mentioned, building people up. Like when individuals get to us, a lot of we focus on some priority populations. A lot of times, substance abuse, justice involved, low income, low education, sometimes single parent households. So it's a very vulnerable population as a client base when they first get or enter into our program. And so our first thought is really around stabilization and how can we stabilize that person or get that person really prepared for meaningful employment. And so when we're talking about the talent network, we're first building that person up in order to be prepared, just be prepared for employment. We're doing a lot of digital upskilling for the 21st century. a lot of preparedness, soft skill training, resume training. And so when they get to the point that we consider, them to be job ready, then that's when they enter this talent network. But we have a talent network that's set up. I mentioned some of the three principles. One of those is around coaching and infrastructure, which I already talked about how important it is addressing not just job readiness, but also, the barriers to employment. That's a big thing with the EK Runway program is to allow people to overcome their barriers. So when we're talking about sustainability, it's really about overcoming a lot of the barriers. Some of the barriers that we see largely are housing, childcare, and transportation. But really, I think one of the biggest barriers is, we don't have a lack of resources in Eastern Kentucky. I feel like what one of the biggest barriers is actually navigating those resources. So our coaches, our support system, that's what they do on a daily basis. They help individuals that come to us, come to our program to navigate these resources, overcome the barriers that they may have so that they are becoming job ready. Now, as far as the talent network, that kind of gets into the other two components of this of the three kind of key design principles that I talked about in the article. And one of those is credentialing alignment or skill-based learning. And then the final one or the third one is around employer-led pipelines and direct employment to connection. So when we get a person stabilized, when we get them job ready, they enter what we refer to and what you asked about, kind of the talent network. And we look at our talent network a little differently also as other areas or other job boards, if you want to call it that, that people do. We are very one person at a time focused, not only through the EKY Runway program, but through our talent network as well. We take each individual in our talent network and work with them to prepare them for job to be job ready, but also prepare them for employment in whatever industry and whatever career path they may look at. So we're working individually with that person, but also working individually with the employer on the back end. And so the skills that that person is learning match what the employer needs in the region. And a lot of this is around, credentialing. You hear now like a buzzword is skill-based learning. You know, it I don't think it's a requirement to get away from that degree that you get in college, but a lot of individuals that come to us haven't had that opportunity, and in the short term are not going to have that opportunity to gain a degree. That might be a long-term step, but in the short term, they can get a lot of training that an employer needs through credentials, through skill base if they're learning on the job. And so a lot of the focus of our talent network is connecting individuals, helping to vet those individuals, working directly one-on-one with those individuals to build up their resumes, if they need help with interview skills, if they need help with digital upskilling, working directly with them, but also, like I said, on the back end, working with the employer to directly align those individuals with direct employment that fits their need, that fits the employer's needs, but also fits kind of the direction of the employee.
Absolutely. I really liked the quote you had in the article about that I think you said it's a vision for what it looks like when we stop treating people as problems and start treating them as the region's greatest potential. And so it's actually, seeing those people as as part of economic development, not as like a separate, problem to solve. And I think the Runway program is a great example of how that's happening and can happen. Maybe speaking a little bit now of taking it kind of outside of maybe our region here in Eastern Kentucky, kind of beyond Appalachia a little bit. What might that look like for the rest of the states or the world even?
Yeah, when we first started the program, I was really worried about, are we going to have enough people to actually enter our program? Are we going to be able to find individuals? A lot of these individuals have been out of work or may have never worked in their life and they don't want to be found. So are we going to have enough people to actually, leads to actually get into the program? But what we quickly found is that we've had some incredible results just in the first 3 months of opening in our doors. We've had so many leads that we've had to back off outreach just a little bit in order to catch up or to keep up with the leads. And so as I explained in the article, and kind of to answer your question, what makes the runway program I think so promising is its replicability.
Mm,
Like it's not just a program that only works in rural areas. It's not just a program that only works in Appalachia. It could be replicated all throughout the country. But I think there are two different kind of facets to that. It definitely offers lessons for rural areas, from the timber towns to tribal communities. Um, but there are elements that are transferable, and then there are certain elements that need to be, I think, customized based on your region or your area. In economic and workforce development, it's known that they build from within. We talk about assets all the time in economic development, and you have to build from within in regards to what assets you have.
mm,
That's the only way to be able to really kind of drive economic development is to build on your own internal assets. And so when we're talking about transferability or replicability, the coaching, the support system that I talked about that really sets the EKY runway apart, that could be transferable anywhere. And it's really about funding that opportunity, like infrastructure, like we've talked about, funding that coaching, seeing it as important as roads, as important as broadband, as important as these industrial parks that we've talked about, the physical infrastructure. And so really diving into that aspect in regards to economic mobility could be, it could matter throughout the country. I think from a national level, we should look at that from a policy perspective
mm.
of really how do we make that part of the funding overall for communities. But then there's that other aspect of the customized aspect that I talked about, like having a specific industry focus when individuals are going for a career development. Appalachia is not going to look the same as Arizona. It's not going to look the same as Alaska. It's going to be a little bit different. Like I said, we have our own assets. We have our own industries that are strong in our areas. And so from a delivery standpoint, what works in Eastern Kentucky, may not work everywhere. But even from a cultural perspective, regions have different attributes, different possibilities. And so when you're designing the program, you also need to think about that of how it matches to your own assets, to your own rich histories. You just need to take that in account when developing individuals and developing that potential that you talked about. Seeing people not as barriers, but not as problems, but the start as kind of an untapped potential that we're working towards.
Absolutely. And you mentioned a little bit of the national level there. What do you think maybe can be done, or some things that may help from a national standpoint?
Uh, Yeah, I think in the article I talk about is several components to national policy
Mhm.
that could be drivers for this aspect. I mentioned kind of the blending of economic development and workforce development. Um, that's not an outdated statement. It can be incredibly harmful, which is what I talked about. Um, There are a number of examples in the article, like braided funding, like metrics and investing in coaching. But if I could really hone in on one, and I've talked about it repeatedly already, I'd focus on the flexible kind of wraparound support
Mhm.
that we provide. One of the things, I mentioned the incredible amount of funding that we got funded through EDA, but one of the things that didn't get funded, and what a lot of people don't know, is we asked for some funding for that emergency or discretionary wraparound support funding. And
Mhm.
that could be, someone has a flat tire, they can't get to employment, someone has needs clothes for work, someone needs tools for work, someone needs emergency funds for childcare for a day or transportation just to get to work. Those are life circumstances that come up every day that could truly derail one of these individuals in regards to one, finding employment, but also staying engaged
Mhm.
to the program, staying engaged with the job. And so this wraparound support, while it may not seem important to some, it's incredibly critical to the overall success of the program. I mean, so I think from a national perspective, if we can take a look at that and actually look at this funding, not only is critical, but it's crucial to the overall success of the program and kind of the more importantly, really the life progression of an individual. And so, from a national perspective, really looking at that funding piece for that emergency wraparound support, that I talked about funding coaching as critical infrastructure. This could be the same as a kind of a support system. Um, we need to from a institutional standpoint, a systemic standpoint, from a national level, like you talked about, look at building these systems around real life, and that's really what it is. These individuals are in real life, and real life circumstances come up, and that's really what we need to be looking at from a national perspective. And one way to do that is through these emergency wraparound funding support.
Yeah, I love in the conclusion part of the article as well. You kind of mentioned the term meaningful employment. I know that's something we kind of say a lot at SOAR, and I think it kind of ties into even the concept of wraparound support and coaching and stuff like that. Maybe as we wrap up, just let us hear what that kind of means to you. What do you mean by meaningful employment, and how is that something that can actually battle, this overarching kind of population loss that a lot of rural communities face?
Yeah, I think meaningful employment could be defined in a couple different ways depending on someone's perspective. But I think if you look at kind of step back a little bit and look at um, the reason why we developed the program, it wasn't just to uh, get someone a job and then forget about them.
Mm,
It was really to get people to the point of sustainable employment. But I think, overall, everybody kind of wants the same thing. Like it doesn't
yep.
matter where you live, doesn't matter what region you live in. Everyone wants to provide for their family. Everyone wants to live, work, and play where they feel at most at home. And everyone wants a good job. And I think that's what meaningful employment is. We talk about certain industries. One of the things that we do when we first accept a client is sit down with them and have what we refer to as a discovery call.
Mhm.
So our empowerment coaches will really sit down with an individual and find out at a personal level what the what the barriers and challenges are, but also what the hopes are of that person, what the dreams are of that person, what that person would like to achieve going forward. And so, really, what we're trying to do is to design a pathway um, for that career development for that individual based on their hopes, based on their desires, based on getting to know that person on a personal level. We say all the time through our program, it's not really about a program. Like we don't look at it as a program. We look at it as, one person at a time. It's non-transactional, very human-centered, and we want to take that approach, especially in Appalachia, especially in Eastern Kentucky. It's one person at a time. And so meaningful employment to me is really, it's not that entry level job. We're going to stick with that person throughout their career, but it's really providing that meaningful employment that provides for that person. If you can, what we truly believe and kind of our North Star for our overall program is that meaningful employment is the key to unlocking prosperity for
Mm,
not only that individual, but also for the individual's family and for the community at large. And so for me, meaningful employment is just a career path for someone that they don't look at it as a job, but career that can provide for them, for their family, and for their community.
absolutely. This sounds a lot of purpose mixed in with that for sure. Well, Will, as we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to add into the conversation? We just want to thank you for taking some time to hang out with us for a little bit today.
Yeah, like I said, I'm a little biased, obviously born and raised in Eastern Kentucky, but having the opportunity to come back, I obviously jumped at the opportunity, had to sacrifice a little bit to come back to the region. I have some small children that I'm very dedicated to, but this work in the place that you and I call home, like it couldn't be more empowering for an individual coming through our program, for our region, but also for our team that we've kind of developed over the last 6 months with this programming. So I just wanted to say that I'm over the moon excited about what this program is currently doing, but more importantly, what it can be doing over the next 5 years of the grant, but even beyond that. You talked about a national level earlier, and I think that from a national perspective, especially from a funding perspective, I can also see philanthropy playing a larger role in that funding of the overall model. Especially when you talk about workforce development. I think a lot of times we talk about economic development, community development, but workforce development should be right there included with all the above, because I think it truly is the driver that can drive prosperity. And yeah, I'm happy to be here today, happy to talk about it, excited about some of the other articles that are going to come out in this series to talk about dive deeper a little bit, dive a little bit deeper into the other aspects of the runway program and kind of detail why we put it together and what's happening and how it works all together.
Well, we appreciate you taking the time to talk with us, and we are excited for this new article series. For all of you guys watching today, you can follow along with us at the SOAR website, which is just www.soar-ky.org. And we'll have the articles all up there for you all to read. And hopefully you'll keep tuning in with us as we keep talking through this series with Will. We thank you so much for joining us, and see you guys next time.